I think it's called butterfly effect, when something seemingly inconsequential has a big impact. And for me, that would have been a jam I did with my friend Kellen a few weeks ago for Modular Mondays. It tinkered with my fascination of systems music and led to inspire me to do the thing that we're doing for Piano Day, Music by 300 Strangers. But also, Spitfire was releasing a new collaboration with Olafur Arnalds, and I felt a combination of that library and this jam could be really interesting. I did a contextual linked above, which really dives into how I did everything. But this video is about me thinking, well, there's quite a lot going on in this piece of music, and I really want to honour Olafur's efforts that he's put into this library by giving it a proper professional mix. And this video is about how much a professional mix engineer can bring to the table. I think what you'll see is how it's not about massive step changes, it's about these little 1%, but spread across the entire mix makes all that difference. So the first part of the video is me a few weeks ago before lockdown preparing what I've worked on here in Logic and in Pro Tools to take to one of the top mix engineers working in the country today. I go down to London and have a fascinating discussion with him. He takes me through what he's done with the mix, but also, and I think pay particular attention to this, talks about how to handle things like bottom end. This gentleman is a master. But first, back to that jam. So where we ended up after the jam was just all of this stuff spat into Logic via the Expert Sleepers ES9, which I'm really enjoying. It really is an amazing way of interfacing between Logic and the modular. And we've got all of our elements. And we did 3 takes, not really because we needed to. We kind of nailed it on the first take, but I wanted to have all the different camera angles sunk in. And I thought, well, it'll probably only get better. In fact, take 2 was kind of the weaker of takes, not because of Kellen or my performance. It was just the way that the modules and the oscillators worked. It just wasn't as strong. Took the intro, take 1, this section of take 3, and then the outro of take 1, and I knitted those together in Premiere Pro. I found out also that not all BPMs are created equal, and in fact the Polyend Sex 98 kind of host BPM is in fact 97.9450. I didn't synchronize it to the laptop. I will do that next time. The idea of this track was spawned from trying to do some decent beats with a modular. From that sprang the Tangerine Dream stuff, and I thought, well, that'll work really well with this contextual I've got to write. So we just started to see how this material would work in the context of the contextual. So let's just have a quick look here. I started playing around with Olafur's Korg patches, which are great. And one of the Stratus pianos, which is this amazing dual felt piano setup. And his Juno pad. So that worked pretty much with all of the musical stuff. When I am losing the amazing pianos, they're so delicate in that. But when you put the drums in, the jam's kind of dominating it, really. So I had to have a little rethink about that. So I had a bit of a tidy up and created the edit that I spoke of. I duplicated the pianos, which is kind of fun. So I've just got them coming in out of phase. I've left it relatively loose. And then these are the only elements of the modular left, with a massive filter on the fart. So it slowly built up the arrangement with the different Stratus elements. Again, you can check out the contextual tutorial above. Let's just have a listen to where I got to with that. We've got another bass here, for example. So the strings being added in, which are Olafur's chamber evolutions, whilst very delicate, gave it a real sense of scale. So I started thinking, well, could we get bigger? So I resurrected the drums from the original jam and decided to basically harvest it for hits. So took the kick, and it's proper old school way of programming, just with audio. Kept the hi-hats. Put some delays on, and then snare. Lots of reverb, clap, reverse clap. I also added in some swells that I made years and years ago with my MS-20. And some hits from Albion. But also recruited the talents of Sally and Homai at the HQ to create some vocals, so gave them this guide, which is a vocal with a tremolo on, and that's actually my wife, and they returned these back to me, which sound great. But I quite like the silkiness of the samples as well, so I've kept those in. In fact, there may have been a little demo of me showing them how I wanted it sung. At the very edge of my vocal capabilities, that. Which gave us this track that we're about to hear, which is kind of my board mix of the contextual. So for me, what I'm enjoying about it, and it's kind of a cheeky joy because it's not really my style, but it's got an epicness which I enjoy, but it's trance epic. So I didn't want to put, I could have easily put like French horns and stuff, but I think it would have become pompous and possibly a little bit kind of, I don't know, is embarrassing the word, just like overacting. So I like the trance epicness, and the point of this video really is to show you how much further an engineer can take this. And I'm really delighted to be working again with Gertz Botzenhart, who's become a favourite of film and TV and games composers all over London, the UK and the US. But he's also responsible for like the archetypal kind of trance hits that you would have heard. I mean, almost, there were such classics, they've almost become cliches. So what I'm hoping Gertz is going to bring to this is separation. So really have these different, I'm so into like the detailed books of Maurice Sendak, or there was this amazing book when I was growing up called Masquerade about a kind of a treasure hunt. Every time you looked at it, you'd see something different. And that's what I love with music, is listening to stuff, pointillism almost, where everything has its little moment and then kind of seeps back into the kind of lake of sound. So it's a bit of that. Gertz is just insanely good at bass management, so he's going to make something that's transferable, just doesn't sound good in here. I hope he's going to toughen up the drums somehow. They still sound a little bit wet, not in a reverb sense, but in a kind of spirit sense to me. And also hopefully just try and make it even more epic. So I'll be really kind of very excited to see how he goes about doing that. And we will go down to London shortly to go and have a little rundown of how he did the mix. So let's go into the final stage, which is a Logic session that I saved as the preparation for the mix. And I've worked with Gertz loads of times before, and we just basically have a rule. If a delay is musical, then include it in the sound. And that's why you'll see that in the olden days, I wouldn't, you know, I'd send it to a bus, and these are pretty much all the same delays, but I have them on the individual tracks. So I've kept those intact. But what I have done is I've muted off the two reverbs. So this one is just the general sweetener reverb, for particularly for the modular stuff, but touch on the pianos as well. This one is just an enormous 8-second cathedral, which again I've taken off because the snare and the clap and those really big kind of the washy reverb bits, it still isn't the right reverb for me. And I know that Gertz has done this so many hundreds of times that he'll have his settings. Other than that, all I've done is I've reset the pans. Again, if Gertz is going to find his way round to teasing these different elements in and out, I don't want him to have stereo files that are leaning all over the place. All I did is it just bounced all of these elements offline individually into this folder. And in that, I created a Pro Tools session, which looks like this. And this is part just courtesy. So he's got the correct tempo, so he can edit to grid, but also just so he can, he can at a glance see what's going on. So this is all of our kicks, then bass, then we go through our synths, pianos, all the way down to vocals and strings at the bottom. So just slightly organized, but I haven't like kind of grouped them or indeed, cut the regions up so he can see where stuff is coming in. I think part of the investigation of going through a multi-track and doing whatever housework that Gertz likes to do prior to mixing a track, that's his journey of discovery. Last things last, I just did a save copy in, which basically gathers everything into one location, everything that we're using, and off we go. And then probably what I'll also do is send him a board mix, so he has a reference mix of where I'm looking to go. So let's get off down to London to see how he's got on. So we've come down to London to the studios of Gertz Botzenhart, or Gertz B, as you're
That's
known.
It, yeah.
And it's Soho Sound Kitchen, and there's
That's
a story there, isn't there?
Yeah, we used to have a studio in the same building, which I rented off you, and which was in Soho. Yeah. Yeah, and then we ended up moving up here to Talia.
We got kicked out, didn't we?
Yeah.
Because it was meant to be a set of flats, and we turned them into studios.
Yeah, we took it a bit too far there.
So I think that what's been amazing is that you've become a very much one of the first call mix engineers for scores, TV. You've worked with Daniel Pemberton on stuff like Steve Jobs. We've done some work together, like on some, I think we did some Poirot's together, didn't we?
Yeah, Poirot.
Alien Isolation.
A lot of films, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you work with people like Anne Nicotine, but also Segun with the Doctor Who series.
That's right, yeah, I just finished that.
Just for the sake of maybe people who aren't familiar with the two main roles of audio engineers, you're largely doing mix engineering, not tracking. And do you want to explain the difference?
Basically, the mixing process is when everything's been recorded, basically, then everything gets sent to me, and I try and make it sound like as if it's all... It's basically just fitting all the pieces of the puzzle together.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're not actually physically recording the different elements largely, overdubs, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I do some of that as well, but mixing is what I do mainly now because it's quite a specialised thing.
And your background wasn't originally kind of film and TV or orchestral. It was actually from dance music and pop and...
Yeah, making records. Yeah. I worked in the 90s in a big studio and we made tons of records there. And yeah, through the sort of 2000s as well. And yeah, now I still make records, but I do a lot of the film stuff as well. Yeah.
It's much more common in the States, but what I've really enjoyed about using different engineers to track and to mix, particularly where the mixing is concerned, is you don't have any ego attached to any part of the recording process.
Right. Yeah.
Often when I've worked with mix engineers who have also tracked it, there's a kind of a love and a bias, dare I say, for the orchestral elements, and something that you're really good at is treating all tracks are equal in your mind. One of the problems with mixing, particularly with hybrid scores where you've got maybe like a dance beat and an orchestra, is the perceived kind of fatness of stuff is often about relative levels. So if the orchestra's really loud and the beat's very quiet, it doesn't matter what you do to the beat, it's always going to be, in our minds...
That's right, yeah. It's going to be quite small.
There's a lot of material in this piece, and I wonder, you know, now I prepared a Pro Tools session for you, but I didn't kind of tidy it up too much because I know that when you're basically learning a track, part of your housekeeping is how you learn what's in a track.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because a lot of sessions they come and I mean there might be over 100 audio tracks there, so it's sort of quite important to just get a handle on it quickly and to just quickly learn what's doing what and yeah, just to get an overview of what's happening.
Right.
So the first thing I always do is I group everything, so I'll just show on the screen here. So and yeah, I'll group and color code. I mean, it sounds quite trivial, but it's super important because otherwise you're just overwhelmed by the volume of stuff that comes at you.
And that's a modern thing, isn't it? With track counts and norms.
Yeah. I mean, in the old days you just had 48 tracks and that was it. And so a lot of the comping and the sorting out was already done actually going to tapes, so you would have maybe all the backing vocals just on 2 faders, whereas now you get sent like 30 or 40 individual tracks, and it's actually quite annoying that I have to sit here and balance everything up, whereas that's more like a production thing, you know, that should really be done by the producer on the day.
Right.
But yeah, now you can actually just sort of always postpone the final decisions. So that's what, that's
I see what you mean. Yeah. When you say on the day, in the sense that they would have to bounce stuff down and commit to a drum mix. And,
literally. I mean, the drums would have been separate still, so you'd have still your kick drum and your... So that will always be separate, but if you had different sort of groups of backing vocals, you'd have to just bounce them down because you couldn't have just the whole tape being taken up by individual takes of backing vocals. It just wouldn't work.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've colour-coded stuff, and I can see that you've also kind of trimmed regions and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So everything gets trimmed so that it doesn't sort of have to play loads of just empty audio. It just takes a bit of load off the CPU. You see here in red is our drums, green the bass, then sound effects here in the light green, and our strings. So the strings here are actually nicely sort of comped together, or they're sort of already in a group. I think there must be a Spitfire strings. Yeah. And and then we go down.
Stratus. This is the new Olafur Arnold's piano library. Right. This is a contextual demo.
So that's the piano here, and then we have the lead piano bits. Then we have some analog synths here that are really nice. And then down here, my vocals are always pink, so we have the vocals. And down here, there's some more vocals, synthetic vocals.
The thing that immediately strikes me is I can see that you've made, certainly if we go up to the top to the drums, you've made some edits there.
And when the stuff comes in, like as I work on the drums, if I hear that stuff's flamming or out of time, or especially with live drums, it's quite often, the first thing I do is just to edit, because if stuff's out of time or out of tune, then no matter what you do, the best mixer in the world couldn't make it sound good, because if it flams and the singer's out of tune, then it's just never going to sound any good. So,
no.
So there's always a little bit of housekeeping and just little tweaks. And
how do you determine what are kind of artistic decisions and what are mistakes?
Yeah, that's that's the difficult bit. Yeah, don't do anything too extreme, because then the artist or the producer's going to complain. And
I guess that's what relationships are about as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's much easier if you work with someone that you've worked together loads before. So I know this composer, he just wants everything exactly how he did it, whereas the other composer I worked with last week lets me have completely sort of artistic free reign, and I can do pretty much what I want. So that's always a thing you have to, first have a conversation, or try and get to know your client. Absolutely. Before you
and we've worked for many years, and you know that I care about things like drums and bass,
right?
And so you hear that's not intentional. There's something wrong there. Can we have a little listen to what was problematic about it?
I'm going to drag this audio file out and play this little bit of kick drum. See, there's a double trigger there. I don't know, it's on that second hit of the bass drum. So if I undo that and play what we have now, see, that's clean now.
Great.
So it just makes a difference. It's little things like that. You probably in the mix, you would never hear just one thing, but if there's loads of little sort of things in there that aren't quite right, then the whole thing just falls apart a bit. And especially stuff like, I mean, the most important sort of elements are always like your kick drum, your lead vocal, your bass.
Yeah.
So just make sure all that fits.
Did you start with the drums, or?
Yeah, I normally start with the drums. Whereas on this track, because it starts with these Stratus pianos. I actually started with these pianos. Sort of tried quite a bit of reverb and treatments on them, but as you can see, everything's bypassed now. So I tried quite a lot of things. Yeah. And then I listened back to the demo. I mean, that's another thing that's always quite important before you even start sort of doing changes, is always sort of listen to the demo a few times, or the rough mix, because that's what people are already used to, and it gives you a good idea of how the composer or the producer hears the track balanced up. And
unless they say to you, I guess, listen, it's all over the place. There's elements in there. There's an arrangement to come out. See what you can do to fix it.
Yeah. Or sometimes you hear a rough mix and you just think, oh, this sounds awful. So, but most of the time, I mean, because the sort of caliber of producers and composers I work with, their rough mixes are actually pretty good. And also the other important thing is, if you mix for film or TV, then the people in the edit, they already have the demos, or they have the rough mixes, so they'll be working to them and editing to them. Yeah. So if you then deliver something that's completely different, they're probably not going to like it. So you have to sort of stay within the boundaries of the rough mix.
So it's what you're saying, kind of, it's about just making the mix sound better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you have to sort of find the elements that need improvement.
Okay.
But not deviate completely from it, unless, like we said before, the rough mix is terrible. But,
and I guess we can also presume that what you're presented with will sound good in the composer or the producer's room, but not necessarily it will sound good in all rooms.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah, because they probably don't have a nice studio like this. So, they sort of a lot of them work from home, or. I mean, some people, like one very, very successful composer that we both know, he just works on in his tent. That's the speakers he uses, and
that's
just incredible, isn't it? So, what I do, obviously, that has to translate into the theatre. So, and that's obviously the other thing about mixing for cinema, is that it's going to be played loud and in 7.1 and with a subwoofer. So you
left the Stratus pianos as they are?
Yes, so I literally just gave them a little bit of this TC reverb. It's very important in my life. It sits over there. It's called a TC System 6000, and it has a program in there called Large Warm Hall, which we all love. It's kind of like an industry standard reverb for film, and it sounds great on strings and pianos.
It does.
Yeah, and you can also actually get that as a convolution reverb, which is included in the Pro Tools here, in this one called Space, Digital Reverbs, European Surround, Music Surround. There it is, large warm hall. Yeah, so load it up, and then you have the same as the TC.
I mean, the advantage of the 6000 is 5.1, and it's dedicated hardware. And my argument with the TC6000 is, is it the greatest reverb in the world? Well, that could be argued till the end of time, but it is the reverb that everyone uses, pretty much.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
On film score, so it is the sound of film.
Yeah, and it sounds beautiful, and it works really well in 5.1. So it's always good to sort of have a few sort of go-to plugins or hardware things that that just work. So when you start off, you sort of have a template of sounds, and you know it's going to be good.
Talking of templates, do you use your own kind of templates?
Yes. Especially for film mixing, it's really important to have a template, because everything gets grouped into stems. So so the stems are there, so when they're in the dub, they can still sort of make small changes or edits to the music. Right. Like they often do. So I usually deliver sort of around about 10 stems. So you have the drums, percussion, bass, pads, strings. So you sort of group everything so they can still make some creative decisions if they need to in the dub. Yeah. So then that's where it gets quite complicated for me, because obviously then every group of stem, or every stem group, needs its own sort of reverbs and delays. So so you have a lot of tracks, and it just takes a long time to set that up. So normally there's a template, so I can sort of hit the ground running. So all the routing and all the reverbs and everything's already set up. So I literally just have to load in the audio tracks, and I can start mixing straight away. So every sort of film music mixer, film score mixer has his own template.
Oh, really? Their own little kind of toolkit.
And it's always interesting to see somebody else's as well, see how they do it. And
are you protective over them, or do you pick up ideas from each other?
I don't mind. I'll show mine to anyone. I'm sure some people are protective, but I always think it's better to be open, and just to learn from each other.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And share the knowledge.
Share the knowledge, share the love. So should we look at these drums then?
It's got a slight sort of retro 70s or 80s feel, this track. So that's why for the drums I chose this reverb. It's an 80, so it's kind of the predecessor of the 480. So this was the first sort of big digital reverb that came out, sort of big expensive one in the 1980s. So Trevor Horn and people like that used this. So this is it dry. So they just have a bit of delay already on them. And then I'm adding this, the Lexicon 224. So it's sort of just quite a splashy reverb on there. Plus this reverb here, which is another reverb from the TC, but which basically emulates an old AMS RMX16 reverb.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's another sort of 80s sounding reverb, because I just wanted quite a bit of a retro sound for this.
Great.
So this is now what our snare reverb sound like. So it's sort of quite wide and splashy, but it's sort of got that sort of crunchy old
granularity.
Digital. Yeah. It's probably 8-bit, or it's old technology, or at least an emulation of old technology. And then I always send my drums actually to a bus for some parallel compression as well.
And what does parallel compression mean?
It basically means you have your basic, your normal signal that goes unprocessed, and then you have another path which runs parallel that you compress. So you can get this sort of nice compressed sound, but without sort of completely losing the punch and the openness of the top end.
So it's literally like a duplication of signal?
Yeah, that's basically it, yeah. So quite often in digital chains you do that, and you sort of get slight phase problems, which isn't great on the drums. So that's why I love using this plugin here, which is another UAD one, where you've got a mix button here, so you can mix the dry and the compressed
I've never
signal.
seen that on a compressor.
Yeah, it's really good, and then you never have a phase problem. And this compressor is really great as well, because you can use it quite gently, or you can really smash
the
stuff up.
bejesus out of it.
It's even
Is there not a
it's
nuke?
even got a nuke button on here, which, funnily enough, we're using on this. You see, that's our compression going. So it sounds a little bit compressed, but it doesn't sound too squashed. So we can sort of do a before. And after. So you see it brings everything forward slightly. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a massive difference on this, but I mean, when you sort of on some sort of, you know, more modern sounding tracks or rock tracks, you can turn this knob a lot more to the right and bring in more of the compression.
Great.
Yeah, but I mean, this is quite gentle, isn't it?
Oh yeah, no, it's very soft. Yeah. Good stuff.
Okay, so that's pretty much our drum processing. Right. So on this one we have this sub bass, and a problem with a lot of sub basses is, one, they're so low that you can only hear them on big speakers, really. And then also some sort of low notes really disappear, and then if it goes to higher notes, suddenly they really pop out. Yeah. So I had a little bit of a problem with that on this track, but it's something that happens quite a lot with sub basses. As nice as they are, for mixers sometimes they're a bit problematic. And again, you want, I mean, in an ideal world, you want to hear this even on small speakers, don't you? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because otherwise it sounds like, once you listen on small speakers, it sounds like there's no bass. Yeah. Do you have also this sort of 16th bass up here, which is a lot, so that's a lot less problematic. I mean, I literally didn't really do much to it by the looks of it. There's a plug-in on there, but oh yeah, just a little bit of compression, that's all it does. But then if we listen to the sub bass, so if I take off these two plug-ins, you can hear, even on the big speakers, it's very, very low until it goes there. See, suddenly that note just really pops out. Quite often I just put a low cut sort of at 20 hertz or a bit below, which is basically sort of just, you can't really hear anything under 20 hertz, and there's no speaker that sort of replicates it. So quite often you can just cut that out, because... But if you can't hear it, why cut it? Well, because it still takes up energy. So you're... Is this when people are saying making the mix more efficient? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, exactly. So it just takes up energy on your mix and loudness and everything. On the physical loudspeakers, basically. Yeah, and on the speakers, and also on sort of on the compressors, or if it comes on radio, it still sort of gets pumped out, and the compressor will react to it, but it's basically reacting to something that you can't hear, which is basically then something that's superfluous. So you might as well just get rid of the frequency and just makes your mix a bit cleaner. Okay, so that's from 20 down? Yeah, sort of from 20 down. I mean, it will still cut a little bit more here, but that's sort of, I thought that's something I can live with. This is a really great plugin because it's a good EQ, and it's also got a dynamic EQ in it, so you can make every band dynamic, which means you can compress or expand on the band that you're working with. So if I put this in now, where it goes higher, you can see that then there compresses it a bit. It sort of pushes it in a little bit, so that those high notes don't stick out so much. For this, I've opted for this plugin here called Max Bass, which is a waves plugin, which basically it creates harmonics above the bass frequency. So it just makes it much easier to hear on the small speakers. So if you have a 40 hertz frequency, it makes an 80 and a 160 hertz. So it basically gives it some overtones, which makes it more audible. Oh, wow. So if we put it on the small speakers here, with this plugin now, we should be able to hear the bass. Oh, a bit of crackle there. Whereas if I take it out, it's pretty much not there. Yeah. I mean, it still sticks out a little bit, this high note, but nowhere near as much as it did before. So now it's all quite even. Great. Do you ever kind of use distortion to do the same thing with basses?
to create kind of upper
Yeah,
harmonics?
distortion will do the same thing. And also we have on Pro Tools, it's got this great function on, they have it on Pro Tools Ultimate, but I think you can also actually buy it for the native Pro Tools version called Heat, which basically gives you distortion. So
almost like tape, kind of.
Yeah, so it either emulates a tape or an amplifier. So you have to turn it on here on options, it's down here, so you go activate heat. So it puts it on every channel, and then you have a sort of global control here where you can add the drive. So if you turn it to the left, it adds even harmonics, so it's more like a tape machine, or a valve where you get sort of nice warm distortion frequencies. Or if you turn it to the right, you get odd harmonics, which makes it
ampy.
More grungy, more aggressive.
I'll have to try that out.
Yeah, it's very good. So I'm actually putting quite a lot on it for this. It sort of all came sounding quite clean, so just to give it a little bit of grunge and distortion just makes it all a bit more gritty, and you can sort of get hold of the sounds better.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, so because everything's digital now, so there's not really much distortion in the chain, whereas you used to work with tape and mixing desks, so you'd get a lot more.
And even with the digital synth, you'd it would go. You'd have to plug it through a tie line and all of that into
exactly.
a desk. And
yeah. So you have all these cables and this and that, and it sort of all adds a bit of colour in. Whereas with digital, you just have none of that. So you have to sort of use plugins to emulate it. I mean, the other thing that's important, like we talked about earlier, is the template. Also have a sort of template for just mixing records and.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that would usually be. A few reverbs and delays and things like that. Again, for this one, I sort of opted for sort of quite organic or natural sounding things, or things you would find in a studio. I mean, another one I really like is this one here by UAD called Ocean Way, which just emulates a live room, because again, if something's just comes from samples or from it's from the digital domain, it's quite nice to just put it in a room like you've recorded it. You can change the microphone position and you can move it in and out and all stuff like that. And again, it just makes it sound a bit more natural. Another plugin I really like is this one here, the Valhalla Shimmer, which just puts really long sort of tail on something, makes it.
Alexis Smith's MS-20. There you go.
Is it?
Yeah.
Right, okay. Yeah, there we go. And now it's got a shimmer on it. Yeah, Valhalla reverbs are great. They're quite reasonably priced, and they just sound great, and they're very versatile.
And they have character to them as well.
Yeah. Like, you can make it 70s, 80s. They're great for really long tails here, like let's see, 10-second reverb. Yeah, make yourself a template where you sort of have all your favourite reverbs sort of there ready to go, because if you always have to stop and set up a reverb, and it sort of just inhibits the flow a little bit. It's better to have everything there, and then you can just start, and then if in your head you think, oh, I want this reverb, then it's just there.
Us composers use templates with, like, we'll create a template for a project maybe. So, you kind of go, this is my band. And I guess what you're doing is very similar in the sense as you created a virtual studio with all the bits of outboard that you use, albeit inboard.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a really interesting way, because it does break up the flow having to... I mean, it's one thing plugging up one of these, but I just think the kind of endless clicking of a mouse is not particularly inspiring.
Yeah, exactly. And because like a lot of the mixing is sort of, it's all about intuition, and so you just want to be able to do everything really quickly. Yeah. And
as we saw earlier with what you'd looked at with the Stratus pianos, is you tried some stuff, and it's a lot easier just to try stuff by flicking stuff in and out if it's all connected and rooted.
Yeah.
That's a good tip.
And then last not least is the Mixbus, again where you can sort of add some essential mix tools. Do
you want to explain the importance of the Mixbus where mixing is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically where everything gets summed to, and then that's your stereo, your stereo output, and just so you don't have to work so much on every sound, so you sort of you can put an EQ over the Mixbus, sort of, you know, normally we'd boost some top end or some very high mids and some bass as well. And put it through something like this here, the GML or the Manley. They're both program equalizers, and they just give a nice color to the sound, and also, yeah, like the GML sort of just puts a sheen over your mix, and you boost some top end, and straight away you have a good sound. And also the bus compression is important. So SSL has obviously the famous SSL bus compressor on it. Yeah. Yeah, just to hold everything in a little bit, and yeah, sort of control your mix a bit.
Flattening is the wrong word, but I find the Mixbus, particularly when kind of making stuff that sound like tracks as opposed to the slightly more dynamic film and TV music, is it makes it. It's where you can make it all as one.
Yeah, it's like glue, isn't it?
Yeah,
yeah. So yeah.
And because this isn't a piece of applied music, this is a track. You've applied some glue.
So I've actually made a hardware insert where I'm actually using these two EQs here.
Okay.
GML just does about 3 dB at 16 hertz, but it sort of shelves down. So if you would look at an oscilloscope, it will probably start lifting the frequencies from about 2 or 3K upwards.
Okay.
And then it just does a shelving curve.
Okay.
So yeah, it just gives a bit of edge to the mix, and it sort of adds this radio frequency. This straight away just makes your mix sound expensive, which is good.
And again, GML is also just used a lot. By,
yeah, exactly. It's sort of a sound that people know and love. So again, yeah, it's an industry standard.
One of the big things that you, I imagine, have to bear the brunt of is recalls. And
right.
in this kind of, people know that you can recall in this digital age. So do you have to limit the amount of outboard, and do you have outboard just doing very specific things, so you're not having to? Yeah,
I mean, I literally just put it on the Mixbus now, or if I have a
right.
Yeah, and then I just take photographs of it, so I can recall it.
Okay.
Quickly. The other thing is if I like say I use a distressor or the retro compressor, if I use it on a channel, I'll just commit it. So it's got this great function on Pro Tools here now. So if you have an insert somewhere, you can just go, you right click on it, and it gives you the option says commit up to this insert. So it basically just makes a digital copy of what goes on before and including this insert. So you just basically write it in, so you don't have to set that insert up again if you do recall. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about the Mixbus. Just for good measure, there's another massive passive on there. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why I put another one, but you know, quite often when you mix, stuff just happens and you just do it till it sounds good. Yeah. UAD1 plugins are really the cleanest and best sounding by a long way.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, they just sound incredible, and I don't know how they do it, but I mean, you do pay for it as well. They're not cheap, worth every penny.
Really?
If you can afford it, yeah.
A lot of them they're modelling existing bits of very, very expensive kit. I mean, these outboards are hugely expensive. GML particularly.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I remember buying a power supply for one of those things.
I know, it's like over £1,000, isn't it?
Yeah. For the power supply, it's insane.
I know, yeah, it's crazy. I wouldn't really put many other plugins over the Mixbus other than UAD ones. So here's another UAD one, which is basically emulation of the SSL Mixbus, which is over there. Again, it's just for compression, and then I also have this tape emulation, which we used to have these tape machines in the studio. And yeah, I remember always putting mix onto tape, onto half-inch tape, and then you sort of compare it back, and it would just sound a little bit better coming back off tape.
Right.
Yeah, so so that's why it's nice to have an emulation. So again, it just sort of glues it together a bit. It does something a bit nicer to the bottom end, and adds a bit of sparkle on the top, and
wow,
it's just a.
And that's UAD, isn't it? Again.
Yeah, that's another UAD. I mean, you've got like tons of controls on it. Here we're actually using it at 15 IPS, which lifts the bottom end a little bit, gives a bit of a bass lift.
Great.
And yeah, you can choose your tape type. I always use it on 456 because that's what we used to record on. Yeah, again, just adds a bit of warmth and sheen onto the mix. So
fantastic.
yeah.
One final. Sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, we haven't really talked about the most important thing of mixing, which is basically balancing.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the most crucial bit about mixing, is getting the balance right between all the instruments. And again, quite often, I mean, you do have to listen again to the rough mix just to get an idea of what's meant to be in the background and what's meant to be loud. I mean, quite often with, you know, with pop records or with records, it is kind of obvious, but in film scores there's a lot more difficult.
Sure.
Or even on this one, because there's just lots of synths doing 16th or 8th and bits of piano. So yeah, that can be a bit confusing sometimes if you just have loads of sequences and synth sounds going. Or even more difficult is when you have these sort of droney cues and on films. A lot of this sort of more cool or edgy stuff you see on Netflix or HBO, the directors now, they just like drones, don't they?
Yeah.
So if you're given like 20 drones, it's like, where do you start balancing them up? So so balancing is like the most important thing really that a mixer has to do.
But I guess this is where you bring some objectivity, in the sense that, you know, you don't have any ego attached to any of the sounds. And I think, I think so often it's like when directors have to cut their favourite scene from a film because the film isn't knit together. You know, the minute I hear stuff that you've balanced and mixed is you've compartmentalised sounds into different kind of departments, if you will. So for me, you know, the board mix that we came away with really didn't make much of the lead line, and you've really drawn that out. And that's something you must battle with throughout your career, is can you hear the vocals? Yeah,
I mean, that's why when we print mixes, like all mix engineers, you do a mix, like you hear it in the studio, but then you also do one with a vocal like 1 dB and even 2 dB louder. Yeah. So that you have different options, because that's like the most common criticism of a mix that a label or A&R person will say is, oh, you know, a vocal's not loud enough. Yeah. So it's good if you just have another mix there that you can send straight away.
Particularly if you've mixed in the same room as a guitarist, because they always make their guitars too loud, don't they? Be unfair.
That's right.
Be unfair to guitarists. And the last thing I did notice is there's also, you've made some edits to the vocal tracks.
Oh yeah, the vocals.
It's a really difficult line to sing this.
Yeah, that was quite difficult. So so that's the first thing I did, was just to make sure that the timing's on with the rest of it, and especially there was sort of the first vocal which goes da da da. I'm just going to solo it. Da, 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 da. So it's very rhythmical, and it's also quite sibilant. So if that's not really on with the drums and the rest of the track, it's going to cause you problems in the mix.
Right.
And I can also show you, I'll zoom in a little bit, that I actually reduced the sibilance quite a lot. I also put an auto-tune because some of the tuning wasn't really great, and also there's sort of a few parts there that build up with harmonies, and I just found it just wasn't clean enough. I couldn't really feature it.
Gotcha.
So yeah, because I just wanted to hear them a bit louder.
That's an interesting point.
Then when I turned them up, something just didn't really sound great. So I sort of investigated the tuning and the timing and felt it needed fixing. And once I'd fixed it up, I could really sort of feature it, and it sounded very nice in there.
I think that's a really good tip for if you're having difficulty placing something in the mix and you're finding you're forcing it further and further back. Maybe there's something that you need to look at in the performance.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the vocals and stuff like that, it's quite easy to tune. I mean, I find like violins and cello and those kind of instruments, they're really hard to tune, even with Melodyne. And because it's something in the, I don't know, like how the instrument sort of adds to the vibrations or the intonation. It's a real uphill struggle to tune cello and violas and stuff like that.
So always worth getting another take.
yeah, it's worth getting it right on the day, and also get a good player.
Yeah.
It makes my job much easier if it's a good player, and then I don't have to sort of try and hide anything. If I can just go, oh, that sounds great, let's turn it up.
Yeah, I think it's always worth. I think I make the mistake of of being almost apologetic to musicians and wanting to get it done as quickly as possible, but it can create havoc for you further down the line. And I don't really like the idea of fixing everything in post.
Yeah, but I mean, also, as you know, quite often there's a very tight schedule when the stuff gets recorded, because it just costs a lot of money, doesn't it? The studio and the musicians, so they sort of cram in a lot of material.
Tell me about it.
So quite often there just isn't time to do another take. So it's always a compromise, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll just quickly show how. What I did to reduce the sibilance here. So okay, so this is what it sounded like before. You see the D is very, very pronounced. It sort of really gets in the way of the mix. So yeah, first I added the auto-tune, then there's this plugin here, the SPL, which is a transient designer, so you can basically control your attack and your release or sustain, so you can make basically take off attack, or make it sound less or more attacky, and you can also add sustain, so you can sort of make it ring out for longer. Okay. So I used that, and I turned the attack down quite a bit, and then I also used this a de-esser here. I'm just going to play it now. So you see that's cutting in quite a lot, and the Ds are already a lot more controlled. And then also this, one of my favourite EQs. Again, so that cuts out some of the sibilant frequencies up here.
And you've chopped the bottom off, which is an artifact of the microphone, really, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, quite often you don't really need much of the frequency sort of below the bass frequency of the instrument. So again, just to make it a bit cleaner and just to be able to feature in the mix, I felt it didn't really need any of the sort of low end for this. Yeah, for this particular sound.
Great. Great stuff.
Sounding nice now.
It's been a fascinating insight, Gertz. Thank you so much for all the time you spent on this. I guess the thing I would really recommend doing with mix engineers is is not to be there whilst they're mixing. Would you agree, Gertz?
Yeah.
Kind of pop in and out. I think what I like about the relay race of this part of the process is that you have an objectivity to bring because you're new to the music, you're new to the sounds, and then I can take a step back and not hear your process, and then I can come in with fresh ears, and that's an important part of the process.
Yeah, but that also takes trust, obviously, from you into me. But that's why, I mean, a lot of composers I work with, we've worked together all the time. So they kind of know what I do and I know what they want. So they don't always have to be here while I mix, and a lot of it is actually quite boring for them as well. So that's because I'm literally sitting here doing my thing, and there's not really that much for them to do. So and because also the composers, as you know, are always working against the clock. So they're probably still busy writing other cues for the same project. So for them, it's good also if they don't have to sit here all day watching me work. But then, obviously before we hand it over, they will come in and changes will get made. So they sort of listen to my mix and then put a few suggestions and.
I think it's for me. If I had any advice about that part of the process, is particularly if you haven't worked with mix engineers often, is that when you press play, you can panic a little bit because there's surprises and stuff. And I always recommend absolutely sitting there and just listen to the mix through once. Don't ever stop. Just listen to it, because the initial kind of is this right? Is this right? Will settle down, and often if there is an issue, the issue won't be it's all wrong. It may actually just be something might be a little bit loud or something might be a little bit quiet. And I think that's what you need to do is the first couple of passes of listening to this thing, and often I'll go, can I hear it again? Is go, there's something not quite right, or think there's a number of things that aren't right, but actually realise, no, it's just one thing that just might be a bit louder than I'd imagined it to be. And as a consequence, I can't hear something else. And I think that that's where you need to really apply some intelligence to the feedback that you give, is to really listen to what is, it's instead of being specific about this is too high or this is too low, it's going, I feel I can't hear this, or that is too prominent. That's the kind of advice I would give. And then I think another nice thing to do is, once maybe you've addressed, say for example, if the drums aren't quite kind of bright as you want, or aren't as fat as you want, once you've addressed the general points, I think it's quite good to listen to it and just make some notes. Because some things will be little rides that need to be made and stuff. Based often...
Yeah, that's really crucial, because to make the notes, because sometimes by the time you get to the end of the track, you would have forgotten what...
Absolutely.
And the initials are the sort of, the first impression is really important. So yeah, because then you're coming to it fresh.
Yeah.
So...
And sometimes, you might listen to it and just go, the general reverb level is too high or too low. It's always too low with me. I love a bit of splosh, you know me. But I just think you just have to be really, really listen and really think about what is going on in the sound and how to give notes that then are constructive, I think.
Yeah. And in the end of the day, I work for you, so for me, the most important thing is always that my client, or who's actually made the music, that they will love it by the time we've finished the mix, and then what everybody else thinks is sort of then comes further down the line. But yeah, first of all, for me, it's important that the artist or the composer actually loves the mix, and that they're happy with it when they go away.
And another piece of advice I would always have, and I experienced when in my early days I was a bad engineer for about 3 years, is that the mistake we used to make is we used to monitor just hysterically loud. Oh. And I mean, whilst your job is to make something that translates to lots of different setups, if you're playing something, at the edge of reasonableness, that is never going to translate to sitting behind dialogue in a film.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I think that's an absolute key thing. Well,
it also just wrecks your ears. So
it also wrecks your ears. I think what's kind of nice is to listen at a working level. As you know, I like to listen always at a constant level. And then I think it can be quite fun, maybe when you crack open the beers at the end of the night, to crank it up.
Exactly. Yeah, whatever you're into.
Yeah, whatever you're into, exactly. Listen, Gertz, thank you so much. I mean, amazing work on this mix as well. Yeah. Gertz's details are down below, so check out more of his fantastic work. And you're available for film, TV, computer games, and tracks and
records,
all of that and records, absolutely. Yeah. Something that a lot of engineers do these days is remote mixing, and that's something that, whilst it's always great to be in the same room as you, this was ostensibly a remote mix where I came in and just checked the final part of the process, which was great. So subscribe if you haven't done already. Please ding that bell if you want to be notified the next time I put a video up. One of those for Gertz's amazing efforts here. So shall we have a listen?
Okay.